Hello, everyone. I'm June Rawl, and I'm so happy that you're able to join us today. Welcome back to another IP Day Webinar Wednesday. Today, we have a full-length training on the new TABE 11 and 12 Language Individualized Instructional Plan. We're going to do a real deep dive into these plans. So I know you've been anxiously waiting for this training, and we look forward to spending the next hour with you to show you these amazing ways that you'll be able to use these IISPs to target instruction and move your ABE student performance data. Before we get started, let's go over some housekeeping reminders. Well, Maria is the presenter today. So Maria, we're so happy to have you back from Miami-Dade County Public Schools. Maria, I'm going to go over a few housekeeping reminders, and then we're going to dive into this.
Excellent. Thank you, June.
Okay, thank you. As you know, your microphones are muted. If you have a question, please put them in the Q&A section. And we want to hear from you. So if you have any concerns, if there's anything you need some clarity on, just enter that into the Q&A section. The webinar is recorded, so you can share it with your other staff members at a later time. It is archived and it will be ready within 48 hours on the IP Day website. All the PowerPoint for today's presentation and the handbook that is associated with this training is already loaded on the IP Day website, so you'll be able to download it there. Now, Maria, I know we've got a lot to talk about, so I'm going to turn it over to you. So without further ado, I give you today's presenter, Maria Gutierrez, and let's get started.
Thank you, June. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm super excited today about sharing our new individualized instructional student plans for the TABE 11-12 language test. And throughout the presentation, we will be referring to these as the IISPs, because the other one's just, it's just a mouthful. Let's take a brief moment just to look over the training objectives for this webinar session. So in this session, we will unveil this IISP for language, which is an intervention tool that has been designed to improve your students' TABE 11-12 language post-test scores. So this very long-awaited tool, the IISP for language, is going to help you customize your instruction to the needs of your students, as well as provide each student with a tool to help him or her monitor progress based on mastery of content and skills. Now, a separate IISP has been developed for each of the TABE 11-12 language level tests. Now, this training is broken down into 3 simple parts. First, we're going to take a brief look at differentiating, individualizing, and personalizing instruction. You know, it is important that we understand the differences in these 3 types of instructions so that we can, at least towards the end of this training, explore how we can personalize these IISPs to become more learner-centered. Second, we will take an in-depth look at the new TABE 11-12 language IISP to see how it was created and what content is included in each of the levels. I'm going to walk you step by step through the process of selecting the appropriate plan for each student and then transferring the student's pre-test data to the plan itself in order to make it more individualized for each one. And third, I will leave you with some concluding words and a brief reflection, which will hopefully lead you to a call to action. All right, folks, so let's begin with our first step. So as we get started, I just want to remind you that here at IP Day, we always develop learning tools and resources based on research and best practices. The development of the TABE 11-12 IISPs is no exception. So we are going to begin by taking a peek into the basics of how you can use these IISPs to differentiate, individualize, and personalized instruction. Now that we've addressed the training objectives for the PD, let's begin by addressing the direction that we want to take as we incorporate these new IISPs into our ABE curriculum for language. Now, I have to briefly address these three buzzwords in education before moving on, because I want you to at least be able to see how you can use these IISPs to address multiple types of instruction. And that's regardless of your preference or which side of the research you choose to support. The bottom line is that learning is a great motivator. We all know this. If your students can actually see that they've mastered a standard or competency and acquired a new skill. So all of these three instruction types lend themselves to reaching this goal. And the new IISPs can be used to target non-mastered content so that minimal time is wasted and students can really build on this sense of achievement. We begin with differentiated instruction. So differentiated instruction lends itself to small group settings. I mean, we all know this. Usually the teacher will identify non-mastered content and skills and group students based on common deficiencies. Lessons are designed around the needs of each group, so it's important to select or develop activities that specifically address non-mastered content within each group. Now, these groups are not static, so this means that students are not always assigned to the same group. So we will basically label this type of instruction as the how, okay? Now, as we move to individualized instruction, we begin to focus on the learning needs of each individual student. The academic goals pretty much remain the same for the course. However, individual students may progress through the curriculum at different speeds based on their learning needs. So the teacher will target one need at a time and skip over content that the student has already mastered. Instruction is calibrated to meet the pace of the student. So you will see when we begin to explore these new IISPs, how each plan, every single one, is created to emphasize what is tested at each TABE level, be that level E, M, D, or A. So you will also see how the IISP allows you to incorporate individual student performance data from the student's TABE individual profile report. So this way you can specifically target standards and skills which that student has not yet mastered. As you review the IISP with the student, he will learn to focus on what has not been mastered and skip mastered content. So we're going to label this type of instruction as the when. And now let's look at the latest buzzword. Let me briefly address personalized learning. You know, this term actually dates back to around the early 1960s or so. However, there really isn't any widespread agreement on a definition for the term. Now, it has, however, become more popular since the RAND Corporation, in partnership with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, began researching personalized learning and its impact on education. Now, what I want to bring across in this training, nonetheless, is that the IISPs can be used to personalize instruction for individual students, should you choose to do so. The easiest way to initiate this would be for the teacher to select the learning activities based on student interests. And this type of instruction combines both the how from differentiated instruction and the when from individualized instruction. And it adds student participation in the selection and the creation of learning activities. Now, throughout the presentation, I want to emphasize and urge you to keep foremost in your mind that one of the key goals for using an IISP is for the student to become a self-directed expert learner who's going to monitor progress and reflect on learning based on mastery of content and skills. This is critical. We want to move from a teacher-centric instructional environment where there's little student choice and little student voice to one that is more student-centric, one where there's more student choice and voice. Now, you will soon see how this is encouraged as a standard application of the IISPs. Now, in simple terms, we know what educators want is very simply to identify and successfully implement gap closing tools that lead to results. It's pretty simple. We're not very complicated. The tool that we are addressing here is the new Individualized Instructional Student Plan, the IISP, for the Taba 11-12 language students. And we're finally at that point in the training where we are ready to unveil the tool, folks, really the tool that is going to close the performance gap in your ABE classrooms. And as we unveil the tool, we will be addressing 4 very basic steps, and I'm going to walk you through each one. So the 4 basic steps that are going to lead to successful implementation of these plans in your ABE language class include 1, well, first of all, as with any test, you know that it is crucial to know the structure of the test as well as what is tested. These new IISPs were created to address both of these topics. As we look at the plan, at each plan and how it is structured, I will walk you through its different components and explain how they address each section of the test. 2, each subject area tested has 4 different test levels. So for example, the language subject area test has 4 test levels. We know this: level E, level M, level D, and level A. So honestly, it would not have sufficed to have had just one generic plan to address all test levels. So we wanted to be as targeted as possible, and we, in response, created a specific IISP for each test level, which totals 4 ISPs per subject area. Now, if we look at the total picture, this means that there are 4 IISPs for language, 4 for reading, and 4 for math. Now, in this training, we're just focusing on the language. I just want to remind you, but we have a question that comes to mind. How do you know which of the 4 plans you need to use for each student, right? How do you know on which test level each of your students is going to post-test? We will be addressing this when we cover step number 2. Now, third, an IISP doesn't really become individualized until it is tailored to fit a student's learning needs. So this being said, we must learn to transfer student test data onto the IISP in order to individualize it. In step 3, I'm going to take you through the step of transferring the student data from the TABE individual profile report to the IISP in order to identify non-mastered content that needs to be targeted during instruction. Finally, we began this training with 3 action words, right? Differentiate, individualize, and personalize. So in step 4, I'm going to show you how you can use the data on the IISPs to address these 3 different types of instruction. All right, let's keep moving. Oops, there we go. All right, let's begin with step 1, understanding the IISP and its component. So if you want your students to do well on the Taba 11-12 language test, it's not enough to just provide good instruction. We know this. I already mentioned that you and your students have to know the test inside out. You need to know what topic areas are tested, how many questions under each area, what question types are included. You need to be able to connect classroom lessons and activities directly to tested content. And these new language IISPs map out each level of the test. They help you and your students focus on content that has not yet been mastered, and will also allow you to track progress over time to identify if and when a student has mastered a sufficient amount of tested content in order to be successful when post-testing. Now, in the first part of this training, I address how differentiated, individualized, and personalized instruction were all taken into consideration during the development of this plan. We've been emphasizing for some time now that these plans will take the guesswork out of teaching. It's like our favorite phrase. But the question is why? Well, in reality, these plans really are truly individualized. We know that they're individualized because they don't emphasize content that was pre-tested. And this, they're very different from the student's individual profile report, because that report only tells you how the student performed on his pre-test. It doesn't tell you what content is going to be post-tested. The IISPs, on the other hand, actually identify the content that every student needs to master at each level to support success when post-testing. All right, so let's talk about personalization. With these plans, students must own their learning because they know exactly how their post-test is structured as well as the content that is tested. Because of this fact, they can track their progress with guidance from their teacher. In this quote-unquote personalized type of instruction, students become experts who monitor their own progress and reflect on learning based on mastery of tested content, right? I keep emphasizing tested content. So let's just get to the plan and let's explore each one or each component in detail. All right, let's carefully look at each section of the plan. I'm going to go over it step by step. At the top, where you have section number 1 with the arrow pointing right, you have the name and level of the IISP. This IISP is the one for language for the level M TABE 11-12 test. Now, what does this mean exactly? The significance is that this plan corresponds to the student's post-test, not his pre-test. What do I mean? Well, because this is a level M plan, this means that the student will be post-testing on a level M language test. Understanding this is critical, folks, because we are preparing students for their post-test. Let's look at an example. Let's say that you have a student who pre-tested on the language level E test, okay? And you know that the student will be post-testing on the level M test. Now, if he's going to be post-testing on a level M test, then the student's individualized plan should be the one for the level M language test. In section number 2, located just under the title of the IISP, you have the section for you to input just basic student, teacher, course information, okay? Under that, you have section number 3, current testing information on the left, and section number 4, post-testing information on the right. Now, section number 3, current testing information, refers to the student's pre-test information. Here, you will write the date that the student took the pre-test, the level, the test form, and finally, the corresponding NRS level score with the correlated scale score range next to it. You input the information in this section based on the student's individualized profile report. But don't worry about that yet. In the next section, I'll show you how to select the correct post-test form and level, along with how to transfer the student's pre-test information to his IISP. For now, let's just look at the structure and content so that you understand it. Under section 4, post-testing information, you have the TABE level at which the student will be post-testing. You can also see the correlated college and career readiness level, C in this example, along with the average word count and Lexile level for this particular level M language test. Now, this information is critical when selecting instructional resources and activities because you want to be sure to provide students with content that mirrors what they will encounter on their post-test. So you're not going to be working on content for level E if the student is going to be testing at a higher level M. Now, section 5 identifies the domain followed by a % in parentheses. The % indicates how much of the test addresses this particular domain. So in this example, 44% of the test is dedicated to questions regarding conventions of standard English. Right under the domain, you have the CCRS or College and Career Readiness Standards category. This domain falls under the language category under CCRS. Right under that, you have the number of questions pertaining to this particular domain. So isn't this sweet? It tells you for each category, you know, for each domain, how much of the test is dedicated to it, how many questions even. That's pretty important information. Section number 6 is to the right of section 5. And here in section 6, you can mark how well the student performed on his pretest on this particular section. Section number 7 is the table header that identifies the tape category, tape subcategory, and the tape skill. All of this is found on the student's individual profile report. The columns titled Emphasis and Align CCRS contain information from the TABE 11-12 blueprints. Now, the emphasis can be labeled either high, medium, or low. And the Align CCRS is going to give you a specific reference number to the correlated CCR standards so that if you want to, you can obtain more detailed description of the standard or substandard, just in case you need it. And finally, the last title in the header reads Mastery Date. And here, a teacher or student can write the mastery date for each specific standard and substandard. Now, this may seem like it's not a big deal, but this is a very critical column because if you update this information regularly in a timely manner, it will give you an easy at-a-glance view of content that has already been mastered by the student. So it actually helps keep the individual student data live. Now, I just want to make reference that it's important to note that sections 5 through section 7 repeat in every format for every domain tested. So that template there, that section of the template will repeat over and over. Now, before we move to step 2, let me just explain briefly what the plus sign and the NA sign mean. As we've indicated in prior webinar trainings on the TABE 11-12 test, we have identified some discrepancies between the blueprints, the CCR standards, and the student's individual profile reports. So when you see a plus sign in front of the TABE skill, this means that the topic appears on the TABE blueprint for that subject area and test level, but it never appears on any of the student's individual profile reports for the same subject area and test level. Now, we wanted to be sure to eliminate the possibility of excluding content that could possibly be tested. So we have added that particular skill to the document and put the plus in front of it. And then with the NA, it's kind of like a similar situation. NA means that this particular skill is found on the student's individual profile report, which means it's definitely tested, but there's no correlated skill on the blueprint. So it doesn't appear on the blueprints. And this is why you won't see an emphasis on here either. All right, let's move to the last section, section 8. This is the last section of the plan. It can be found after the last domain chart. Now, this section has a complete list of every aligned CCR standard on the plan, and it is grouped by domain. So because the information is organized numerically, you know, a teacher can just easily locate the detailed explanation for any given CCR anchor standard or substandard that's listed under a particular domain. For example, let's say that you're looking at conclusions in the TABE category on this slide, and you can see that the aligned CCR standard is 3.W.1.D. Well, if you want to know what 3.W.1.D stands for, you would look under section 8 and scroll down until you locate the number. To the right, you will have a detailed explanation of this particular standard or substandard. Now, you cannot see the explanation here because the document is cut off. We couldn't put the whole thing on this one slide. However, we've added a box to include the full description, which is provide a concluding statement or section. There's also a checkbox in front of the standard number that can be checked once the student masters this standard. So if you just want to look at a list of all the standards and see what's been mastered, this is an easy at a glance view. Now, just to note that in the months to come, we will be aligning the tested TABE categories and subcategories and skills to the new Florida BEST standards. So once this is completed, you will be provided with an addendum of these best alignments. All right, let us move to step 2 to success.
Maria, do you want to address a few questions before we move on? And also remind them that that document is a fillable PDF file?
Yes, sure. Go ahead, June.
Okay. Well, the document that Maria just talked about, just keep in mind that it is created to be a fillable PDF file, so you don't have to keep writing the name in and all that kind of stuff. But Maria, let me ask you a couple of questions. When a student comes in under E, are we going to prepare them to take the M test for the post-test?
Oh my God, I'm so glad you asked that question. I am actually going to address this next.
You are?
I am, and it is going to be so much easier than you guys imagine. It really is very simple.
Okay, then we'll hold on this answer. And then what are we using to identify mastery?
Mastery, or just mastery depends on what each program uses. Some programs use certain books, some programs use certain computer software, and usually those are aligned to specific competencies and standards. So if the student has mastered that activity in whatever text you're using or whatever software component you're using, you can pretty much check it off. And sometimes it's just a verbal interaction between the student and the teacher says, you know what, I know you got this, thank you, moving on, and you can just check mastery. It doesn't have to be complicated. As teachers, we're experts in figuring out when a student has or has not mastered a standard or a competency. All right, so I'm going to move on because we still got a little bit to cover. Okay, so in order to target the student deficiencies in preparation for post-testing with a TABE 11-12, right? And this is the reading, the math, or the language, it's the same process. It is essential that the correct IISP be used in order to ensure that the tested content is addressed throughout instruction and assessed for mastery. We know this. So the question is, which IISP should I assign to a student? And it doesn't have to be complicated, but the first thing you're going to do, and this is in reference to that question, is you are going to select the next test assignment, or NTA. We call it NTA edit day. It's just next test assignment is too long. And it consists of 2 items. One is the form number, and we know that the TABE test could be either Form 11 or Form 12. And the other is the next test level. It could be level E, M, D, or A. So let's start with a form number. Keep it simple. If the student pre-tested on Form 11 of the TABE, then post-test the student on the alternate level, which would be 12. So by selecting the alternate form, you will be able to post-test more frequently. So this will allow you also to increase the opportunities for the student to move from one functional level to the next, right? So always, of course, this is my disclaimer, you know that you have to be sure to follow the test publisher's recommended hours of instruction. And here you have a pretty brief chart. This was taken from the DRC platform, so it is correct. But you always want to refer back and make sure that no new updates are available. All right, so now you have selected the alternate form. Tested on 11, pre-tested on 11, you're going to select 12 for the post-test. Post-tested, pre-tested on 12, you're going to select 11 for the post-test, whatever it is. Determining the next test level is also critical. So always try to post-test the student at the lowest possible level. I know that sometimes you have options with the TABE, but I'll tell you why. This has two benefits. First of all, it ensures that you're addressing mastery of lower level content. So in order to avoid learning gaps. And second, it is easier for a student to make a functional level gain or gain a literacy completion point this way. So if you follow this chart, based on a student's pretest TABE level, which is the left column, as well as the NRS level, which is the middle column, you are going to prepare the student to post-test at the identified next test level, NTA, which is the column on the right. You don't need to look at the scale score range to determine the next test level. You just need to look at the student's NRS level. And in case you're wondering, this information comes straight from the student's individual profile report. So let's look at the example here. The student tested on Form 12, so we're going to automatically assign Form 11, keeping it simple. The student pre-tested on the Level M test for language. And if you look at the blow-up of the student scores from the individual profile report, we see that the student scored an NRS level 3. So you are going to assign to this student to post-test on a level M, look at number 3, all right, in language. Now, in summary, this is the student's next test assignment. In this particular example, right, for language is going to be Form 11 for language, test level M. So just use this chart, it's a cinch. Now, before I move to step 3, let me just clarify something. On the test, on the individual profile report, if you have a plus or a minus sign by the scale score, you may have the option to retest the student at either a higher or a lower level test. Before making the decision, please consider making the decision that will allow the student to post-test at the lowest level possible. And again, two benefits to this. First, it ensures that you are addressing mastery of the lower level content, so you avoid learning gaps. And then the student is going to make that functional level gain much easier. All right, so now that the student's next form number and NTA have been identified, the corresponding IISP can be created for the student. Now, this will enable you, the teacher, and the student to focus on instruction that addresses non-mastered content that will be post-tested. So the IISP level should match the suggested NTA level or next test assignment level. So let's go to step 3 and create the IISP. I love doing this. This is like my favorite part. Based on the student's pretest score, we have already determined that the student is going to post-test on a language Form 11 Level M test. So you need a blank copy of the ABE language TABE Level M IISP, and you also need a copy of the student's pretest, his individual profile report. And here you have an example of the Level M IISP on the left and the individual profile report on the right. So you have an idea what it looks like. Okay. So first thing we do, we type in the student's personal information at the top, and we transfer the current testing information from the individual profile report. So we're going to select M, 12, and NRS level 3. That comes from the student's pretest. And I circled there the information from the individual profile report so you could see where to find it. 3, we're going to now transfer the performance on the individual domains from the individual profile report to the corresponding section of the IISP. Now, notice that the individual profile report in here does not have the performance for knowledge of language domain. Why? Because at this level, you know, this situation happens where there's like an insufficient number of questions under a particular domain, and it's just not enough to determine proficiency. So it's left out. Let me also bring something to your attention. Remember that this student pre-tested on a level M test and will be post-testing on a level M test. Now, this makes it very simple to transfer the information from the student's individual profile report to the IISP because they're both the same level. But if the student were testing on a level D test, and I mean post-testing on a level D test, you would not be able to directly transfer the data from the IISP or to the IISP because the content would be different. You can't say, oh, I'm going to put the level M data results into a level D post-test, you know, template. It doesn't work. So in that case, what's going to happen is you're probably going to have to cover most of the content on the level D IISP. Now, at the beginning of this training, I asked you to keep foremost in your mind that one of the key goals for using the IISP is for the student to become a self-directed expert learner who monitors his own progress and reflects on learning, you know, all based on mastery of content and skills. So it is strongly recommended that you complete this next activity with the student and that you encourage your student to monitor his own progress. Now, you may need to do this a couple of times until he truly understands the process and is comfortable doing it on his own. But, you know, nonetheless, you're still going to monitor progress anyways and determine when he's ready to post-test. It's best to do it with the student as an ongoing process. All right, let's continue transferring the student's pretest data to the IISP. Now, this is the key piece. You look at each domain section. Take one at a time and reference back to the student's individual profile report. So on this TABE report, you need to transfer the information from the column that reads demonstrated skills to the IISP. Now, because these skills have already been mastered, you simply want to put a check mark where you have the mastery date column. Just continue to cross-reference all of it until you have completed this activity for every single domain. Now, once you've done that, you're now ready for step 4 of the process, which is actually using your IISP to differentiate, to individualize, and to personalize instruction. Okay, so now that the student's IISP is complete, you have the document that's going to take all of the guesswork out of instruction, all of it. With this IISP, now you and your student know exactly what standards, substandards, and skills need to be emphasized and which ones maybe they just need like a little light review or can be skipped altogether because they've already mastered them. In step 4, I'm going to address now how you can use the IISP to differentiate, to individualize, and personalize instruction. Now, folks, as like with anything else, you got to keep in mind that this part of the process requires practice and experience. So the more you use the IISP to develop lessons and activities and to drive instruction, the more proficient you're going to become at it. Also remember that every time a standard or substandard or skill has been mastered, it is so critical that the mastery date be documented on the student's IISP. This is the only way that you're going to be able to keep your data live. This means that it's going to let you and the student know when he or she is ready for post-testing. Now, as a student monitors his own progress, he's going to become more self-directed in his learning, and he's going to seek out activities that address the non-mastered content and skills rather than waste time on stuff he's already mastered. Now, you guys already had several questions and we were like halfway through. So I know we all understand that as educators, we know that learning has to be reinforced. We can't just watch a webinar training and poof, whoa, we automatically have processed and internalized all the information that was presented, right? Many of you will have questions even after this 1 hour training. You will have questions about the tests, questions about the IISPs, and maybe even questions regarding how to align the resources to the IISPs. So just remember that at IPDAY, we really always try to anticipate your needs, just like you try to anticipate your students' learning needs. And that being said, we've created a new TABE Assistance Center. And guys, this is phenomenal. This Assistance Center can be accessed directly from our IPDAY website, right? And well, if you were with me on the May 27th mini sneak peek webinar, you already know this exists and I'm sure you've already combed through it. But let me just take a minute for those of you who are new to this today, and just to highlight some of the key pieces of it. First of all, there's 3 sections to the IPDAY TABE Assistance Center. If you look at number 1, you see an FAQ section. And here we will be posting the most common questions and answers about the TABE 1112. If you look at number 2, this is where you can access and download the IISPs. For now, if I'm not mistaken, the language ones are all up, and I believe, June, correct me if I'm wrong, but the reading ones are up as well, correct?
Correct, the reading ones are up.
Excellent. So you have the language ones available, and even though we haven't done the reading webinar training yet, the plans are already there. So we strongly encourage you to kind of download them, look at them. That way, when you do take the 1 hour reading webinar training, you have, it's a little easier to digest the information. All right, so these downloadable templates, there's one for each TABE language level, one for E, one for M, for D, and for A, are all fillable PDFs. And Joseph did a tremendous job at making them fillable. And we really wanted to do this because this means that you have the option to print them, or you can save and update them digitally. It's your choice. I personally hate killing trees, so I recommend you keep an updated digital copy that you can just easily email as an attachment to a student. And that way the student always has an updated plan. And it's very easy. You just save over and attach and send via email. Let's look at number 3. And number 3 highlights the 3rd component for the TABE Assistance Center. And this is the Ask a TABE Advisor. I love this part. I really do, because it actually allows you to ask TABE-related questions and receive authentic responses from one of our TABE advisors. And that's within 72 hours, okay? That's actually pretty good. Now, the questions can be general questions about the test, questions about obtaining TABE certification for our state, Florida, and questions specific to the new TABE Individualized Instructional Student Plans, or the IISPs. Now, we're at the last part of our training, but before we get into it, I just want to briefly summarize some key points that I want you to keep in mind. So you now have the tool that you need to take the guesswork out of teaching and to engage each individual student in taking an active part in his learning. Together, you can both use the IISP to target specific learning needs. Use them to hold individual data chats with your students. Go over what they've mastered and what's pending. Have discussions about, what activities they prefer and which ones are of greater interest to them. As you personalize activities more and more, you will see how students become more engaged and empowered in their learning. And finally, just sit back and watch your data start to move in the right direction. And oh my goodness, what a beauty this is. We've been testing these throughout the state in various schools, and the results have all been positive. So we are very happy to tell you that it actually works. Finally, I do want to emphasize that all of the student pretest data that you will learn to transfer to the IISP comes from the TABE 1112 individual profile report. There's no guessing involved, folks. You know, once you begin to implement these IISPs in your language classes, you will immediately begin to see your students progress more quickly through the course and actually make functional level gains. And watch your data move to the right. Now, remember, these plans are all available in fillable PDF, okay? Save them digitally, attach them, you know, ready to update them again, reopen, save over, attach, send to the students. It's super easy, very easy process. And you're always gonna have an updated version of their performance. Now, regularly review them with your students so that you can keep targeting the specific learning gaps and the needs and take all the guesswork out. Engage your students in taking an active part of his or her learning. Use these ISPs during your data chats. Go over what they've mastered so they see progress, you know, address what's pending so they know what to emphasize, you know, discuss what kind of activities they prefer so that you can personalize their plan a little bit more, right? And engage and empower them in their own learning. All right. Now, as always, you know, June and I love to end our trainings with this, an emphasis on a growth mindset. This is our thing at IPDAY. So I just ask you to take what you have learned in this training just one step further. I want you to change how you look at instruction. Really, really look beyond your class as a whole. When you're differentiating instruction, be sure that you group students based on non-mastered content. And then take it further and begin to look at each individual student so that you can actually address the specific individual needs of each one. Redesign your curriculum if you have to. Develop lessons and select resources based on commonly failed content. Emphasize activities that support tested content. Make an active decision to drive targeted instruction based on these IISPs and use the plan to motivate your students so that they become actively engaged in their own learning. You know, pace activities and schedule post-testing based on each individual student's progress. Review all the information in this webinar and look through the companion resource handbook. It is very good. It has very good examples and explanations. And share this information with other ABE teachers, with administrators, with district personnel. Become an expert in this, in how to apply these. And my last urge to you is to reflect and make a change. So ask yourself, what is working well in my class and what isn't? Have data chats with your students. Be sure that you update these IISPs every single time they master something. Work with your testing department so that you test students as soon as they are ready, as soon as they have demonstrated mastery or sufficient mastery of tested content. Don't wait till just the end of every trimester. Share your student success with other teachers so that they too are motivated to implement changes that are going to drive everyone's student performance data in a positive direction. And I do want to add a special note before we move on to our Q&A session. You know, folks, remember that these IISPs are to be used to target learning gaps in order to ensure that all tested content is addressed and mastered prior to post-testing. These IISPs are not designed for the purpose of guiding all ABE classroom instructions. You know that as ABE teachers, you're still required to teach all of the content that is outlined on the Florida Curriculum Framework. So I just wanted to make sure that you don't just teach what is on these. And June, I guess this concludes our training on individualized instructional plans for the ABE language classes. I think we have a
Maria,
few
thanks.
minutes
Thanks
for.
so much. Let's go to the Q&A. We have a few minutes to answer some of these questions.
Go ahead.
You mentioned emailing the form to the student. Can the student fill out the form?
Well, if the student has a digital copy, he can save it and just save over it. So if you have students that are at that level where they're comfortable following the plan and saying, oh, I need an activity for this, researching the activity, completing it, and then, you know, saying, I know I got this, mastering, put it in, they can do this. They don't need to wait for the teacher. As a matter of fact, it's encouraged, but you've got to watch them carefully initially until that is a solid process and they understand exactly how to do it, because you don't want them to just check off mastery.
Okay, great. And thank you all for your positive feedback and questions. Will the information from the TABE test automatically transfer these documents if they're registered on the DRC site already? No, these are documents that were made through IPDA, so it doesn't have a connection to the DRC website. Let's see, will the forms have a space for instruction for instructors to actually add study content on the same form?
Well, not on the form, and the reason for that is that every single site probably uses something different. And that would have been pretty cumbersome. And it could have been in the format of software. It could be, you know, one textbook versus another. It could be teacher-made materials. There's so many different resources that teachers use in a classroom that it would be impossible to actually address a space that would lend itself to every single type of resources. So we wanted to just keep the emphasis on what is master, what is pending, and then the teacher could just provide the assignment sheet separate, maybe even in a syllabus format.
Okay. Will this training be accessible on IPDA so teachers can review the process? Yes, this webinar and all the documents associated with this webinar are available on the IPDA website. And also I encourage all of you to visit the TABE Assistance Center where you'll see how it's all laid out there. So let's see, great job. We have been using our tracking sheets for years, and these look like they can take the place of them. Thank you so much. That's a very nice compliment. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We've all worked very hard on this, so we're so happy that some of you are already using it, that are seeing results. There's nothing that makes our day more than that, honestly.
Excellent. And we are working on the final plans, the math. It does take a time to do this, so look for those somewhere around August.
Yep.
Okay, before we end, you will see 3 short questions set up here on your screen. We'd love to have your feedback. Please take a moment to answer those 3 short questions.
Yeah, while you guys are answering that, I just invite you all to ask these questions via the TABE Assistance Center. You know, we're there for you. We will get back to you within 72 hours. We don't want you to struggle and think, oh, what was that? And then, you know, maybe interpret it in a different way. So you got a question, feel free to ask us.
We are here to assist.
Yes.
Okay, the poll will now close, but I want to remind you that next Wednesday, June 17th, we are going to be getting a sneak preview of the reading, and then we will have a full-blown presentation on the reading IISPs the following week. So I hope all of you will come back, encourage your staff to come back, and we look forward to hearing from all of you, and stay well. Yes, you do have a copy of this webinar. It's already posted on the website. All right, that's it. That concludes our webinar today. Maria, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you all for joining us.